I remain Frank Vaughn. It is August 1st, 2025, a new month, and thank goodness I'd like to leave July behind. I made an editing mistake in yesterday's video, including the same segment twice and completely skipping another segment. I really hate that when it happens. I actually had a nightmare last night about that very thing. So I apologize for that. The other thing, before we get into serious news, I just want to give you guys a pro tip. I had to buy a pair of replacement keyboards for the office setup, and I just want you to understand that reprogrammable colored LED lights are not standard. So now I'm stuck with a fruity, rainbow-colored keyboard for the next several years until I wear these out. So just make sure you read the fine print when you buy an LED keyboard. To begin today, we're going to Tim Houston. For those of you who don't know, he's the Premier of Nova Scotia, and he's not the first Premier to do this. More housing, more affordability, and more momentum. What is he calling momentum? Construction prefabricated sheds. This is the more affordable housing. Look at the caps. This is a feature of this guy's political career. He's proud of this. I can't believe in Canada that politicians proudly stand in front of this as a solution, as an advertisement for a better future for Canadians. They literally get elected on this messaging in this country, and they're showing you that decline in your living standard is going to be a way of life. Now, I wanted to show you Olivia Chow, who's the mayor of Toronto, which is a long way from Nova Scotia. The politicians seem to be acting in coordination when it comes to the CCAN housing messaging and the future of living in construction sheds. So I went to her Instagram where the video was, and they've received a legal request to restrict this content. We reviewed it against our policies and conducted a legal and human rights assessment. After the review, we restricted access to the content in the location where it goes against local law. I'm in Canada. I'm not operating behind a VPN. And for some reason, I can't see this video that Olivia Chow made. And so I went around the internet. I had to go to Rebel, which has a thumbnail which shows that the video of her standing proudly in front of this. Now, they call it modular homes. CBC called it modular homes. It is CCAN housing. They're not just advertising this now as a solution to the homeless crisis. They want to jam seniors into this. This is exactly what the Toronto mayor said. This is seniors housing. So you work your whole life as a tax slave. You have to send your kids off to daycare so that you can go and work. The state raises your children. You work to be a tax slave for 40 years, and at the end of the road, you might get a CCAN home and a declining standard of living because the public finances are in such bad shape that I very much doubt your old age pension is going to be payable in the years to come. $100 billion deficit by the federal government just this year, without a budget, without a sitting parliament. But back to this for a minute. Clyde's rocking it. Can't wait to move my whole family into a roadside construction office. Looks lovely. 50% more likes on his comment. And look at that ratio. Canadians get it. 1.7K comments versus 247 likes. And by the way, I'm going to be doing Clyde's Friday night live stream tonight. Hope to see you there. But back to the point for a second. This acceptance of decline, this acceptance of CCAN housing as the future of Canada, of modular building, as Mark Harney has talked about, which Brookfield specializes in, is a bipartisan acceptance. Tim Houston is a so-called conservative. Olivia Chow was the wife of a far-left leader of the NDP, Jack Layton. And she remains very liberal, and she is very popular in ultra-liberal Toronto. But it's also at the federal level. Pierre Poilievre has accepted the establishment view, the view of the government, that the Americans are not to be trusted and that they are an enemy to be reckoned with. And it embraces, rather than counters, this misunderstanding that the majority of Canadians have about the way the world works, about the geopolitics of North America, and about what is really good for us and could enable us all to live in actual houses versus living in sea cans. And that is a stronger, more integrated relationship with the United States. And don't get it mistaken, it's not as simple as just building an integrated trade relationship with the United States. That won't solve all our problems. We have a number of domestic issues that the conservatives and the liberals are in perfect alignment about that are undermining our ability to thrive in this country. One is we're immigrating probably 70 to 80% too many people per year, and a lot of the people here in the temporary foreign worker program need to go back. The temporary foreign worker program is indentured servitude, bent to the will of Canadian elites who make vast amounts of money off it. Not just Canadian elites, I shouldn't even say that. We're talking about mostly foreign-owned companies that take full advantage of this. You bring someone over here, you underpay them, you constantly threaten them that if they complain about all the hours they have to work and their poor living conditions, that they'll be deported back home. That's the TFW program for all the progressives who want to signal about not taking advantage of immigration and talking about criticism of immigration being racist. The TFW program is overtly racist and takes advantage of the world's poor and impoverished and displaces Canadians here at home from even getting a minimum wage job. That's what we're talking about here. It's deliberately exploitative. Nobody seems to want to address it. Let's just listen to Stephen Harper for a second, and it's literally going to be a couple seconds to start.
What Canadians, Americans should understand, Canadians are a combination of just angry and bewildered by what is happening here. And that is very real, and it is very deep, and it is across the country, and it is across the political spectrum. But, what can we do on our side? I go back.
Okay, so first off, Canadians are bewildered and angry. I'm not really sure why it's incumbent on Americans to understand our overreaction. Our politicians should be telling the truth to the Canadian citizens. Our media should be telling the truth to the Canadian systems about the unfair relationship that has advantaged us with the United States while we throw invective and insults at them. Now, Stephen Harper's going to go on to say, after he talks and talks and talks, it's so, before he gets to the point, there's all this preamble to pat the Canadian public on the head and not risk insulting them. But he's going to say that the Trudeau government spoiled our relationship with the United States. And that's very true. And the Carney government is extending that. But the problem is it's not just the Liberals. Canada disappointed by Trump boosting tariffs to 35%, says Carney. Prime Minister says historic investments have been made into border security as Trump raises fentanyl again. Oh my goodness. Drugs are still running rampant in this country. Nothing real or tangible has actually been done, because if we were sincere, it's not just about policing the border with the United States. They keep coming up with this number that just 1% of seizures, there actually might be a graphic in here somewhere, I don't think it's here, where they have 1% of fentanyl seizures are coming across from Canada to the United States. But what they're not telling you about is the open ports. They're not telling you about the thriving export market in narcotics that Canada is famous for worldwide, that we keep meth addicts going in Australia as part of our public record, and the money that's made in those transactions on behalf of cartels based in Mexico, on behalf of triads based in China, ends up being rinsed right into our real estate market. Now, what I want to talk about is Poilievre. Conservatives continue to hold out hope for a deal to end all U.S. tariffs on Canada. That means zero tariffs on our steel, aluminum, softwood, autos, energy, agriculture, and anything else. That is the deal Canada had before, and the Prime Minister should accept nothing short of it. But what are we going to give back? Carney, Poilievre, all of you, Harper, what are we going to give the Americans back? We charge them a lot of tariffs, and it's infuriating to me. There's not a single politician in this country that wants to talk about what we charge the world to do business here, our tariffs. There's not a media company that wants to talk about it. There's not a politician that wants to talk about it, whether at the federal, provincial, municipal level. There's this great big bag of truth about what Canada and our trade practices mean to everybody that does business with us, and not a single one of them wants to talk about it. Here it is. Carney's statement also outlined the work Canada has been doing on fentanyl. Canada accounts for only 1% of U.S. fentanyl imports. That's a lie. We're talking about seizures. We're not talking about what actually gets through. This is a number that is repeated over and over and over again, not just on the left, but on the right. And it is the wrong number. And I've shown the math in my videos to express why this talking point it's a lie. That the statement itself is a total lie because he's basing it on 1% of seizures, not 1% of the open flow of drugs into the United States. Carney's not telling you about the fact, as I've highlighted, and I showed you the documents a couple months back, that the United States does not trust the Canadian Border Services agencies to attend meetings where they share sensitive data about their attempts to stop the flow of narcotics because they believe the CBSA is corrupt and that they're in on the drug trafficking problem. I've shown you this. I've highlighted this. Your politicians aren't telling you about it. Your media is not telling you about it. They're crafting a narrative. If Stephen Harper really wants to know why Canadians are bewildered and confused, it's because they're not educated. There isn't a single person telling them the truth at a national level with the reach and the impact. Poilievre has the ability to convene a press conference and attract the entire nation's media. Harper could do the same thing. For that matter, so could Carney or any premier. And in a half-hour media scrum, they could give you more truth than you've had for the past 20 years. They don't do it because their lives, their politics, their careers depend on the notion that the great big lie that all of Canada has accepted is an irrevocable truth of politics, that it can't be changed, that it must be catered to, that Canadians would not accept the truth, that the fact that Canadians believe all of these interwoven myths about ourselves, our worldview, about how the world sees us, our self-importance, our hubris, that all of these things, even though they are not true, represent a political truth because they're impossible to change. So they all cater to the lie. And that is the source of the bewilderment and the anger. It's cognitive dissonance at one level. At another level, it's just the natural human reaction of ill-informed people who can't understand the world around them because they don't have the correct framework for understanding that. There's not a single person in these high positions trying to correct that deficit. Here's the Government of Canada's official Canada's Fentanyl Czar page, where it gives us an outline of what fentanyl is last year. 75% of all accidental opioid deaths involve fentanyl, and 47% of opioid-related poisoning emergency department visits. And what I just want to highlight is how this right here is what I'm talking about. Less than 0.1% of fentanyl seized by U.S. authorities was at the Canada-U.S. border. This is not how you assess how successful we are at infiltrating the American market. You have to use other data points. Now, this is an interesting one. Operation Blizzard. CBSA's targeted operations to intercept fentanyl and precursors entering and leaving the country recently led to 56 grams being seized. This is making a mockery. So just recall how Carney said we've made historic investments and we're doing all of these things, taking action on the official website. The Canadian government is joking. Like, here's the truth. More drug labs shut down. 47 fentanyl labs shut down since 2018. Do you believe, looking around on your streets, walking around here in Canada, it is zombie land, that this government that's been in power for 10 years, who allowed this to take, like, look, in 10 years ago, the situation was not what it is today. They allowed this to flourish. They allowed this to prosper. They allowed the triads to come in. They allowed the cartels to set up shop. They were more than happy to launder bags, literal bags of cash, through BC casinos. They were more than happy to launder it through Canadian banks into our real estate market. This stuff is not conspiracy theory, folks. This is stuff that I've put paid to in my video work. They allowed a thriving economy in the illegal market that is international in scale. Canada is a northern narco state. Trump is right to point it out. But right here, 56 grams, that's nothing. And the Canadian government knows it's nothing. So if we're making historic investments, and this is the result we're getting, not only are they wasting taxpayers' dollars pursuing nothing, they're also making mock of a very real problem that's killing thousands of people and destroying hundreds of thousands of lives all over this country. Kevin Brosseau, Canada's fentanyl czar. This is what he's been up to, 56 grams. I've got a harp, no pun intended, on this point again. Stephen Harper says he advised Mark Carney's government to move away from the United States. I think it's fair to say, probably the most pro-American prime minister in Canadian history, Harper said of his tenure in 2006 to 2015. However, when this government did actually ask me a few weeks ago what my advice would be, my advice was the opposite. Independent of current disputes, just because we have that geographical proximity doesn't justify the degree of dependence that we have on a single market. We have opposed both the conservative wing and the liberal wing of the governments of this country have opposed all of the things over the years to increasing degrees. It's never been as great as it's been in the last 10 years. The things that would make Canada strong. We do a little bit of protectionism here and there in the name of national resilience, but it's only for certain select cartels. Everybody else is just left to flounder and fail by themselves as the country's overrun by crime, as the military is denuded. So we actually, you see, a strong military is a measure of a nation's ability or a nation's will to stand on its own 2 feet, independent of someone else. We've already made the choice to become a resource colony to the world, including the United States. It's the height of absurdity for Stephen Harper, or for even Mark Carney, who worked under Stephen Harper at the Bank of Canada. These are men who have internationalized Canada, who left us wide open to take over. And now they want to pretend that they care about the national interest. It's not about that at all. It's about remaining on the road towards globalism, towards the World Economic Forum. These things have kind of fallen off the radar. In light of Epstein and all these other things, there is still this international order that is hell-bent on forcing its will down the throats of the people who are already suffering in these nations. And once again, this article doesn't talk anywhere about the tariffs that we charge the United States. All of the coverage is the same. It doesn't tell you the truth about what it's like dealing with Canada. All the while we insult and defame, as Stephen Harper rightly pointed out, the United States. We have this superiority complex, even though we're dependent on them militarily. We're dependent on them for this favorable trade relationship where they allow us to charge them through the teeth to do business here and put all of these heavy restrictions. I just wish I could read the truth in Canadian media or hear it fall from a politician's lips just once in my life. And there are other issues. It's not just trade. Canada lies to itself all the time. The public believes a lot of myths, and there isn't anybody trying to counter it at official levels. Ontario family sues hospital and staff after son's death. The long and short of it is their 16-year-old son, and you got to think about this, man. Nothing in your world, if you haven't had children yet and you're a good and loving person, you should probably give it a shot, just so you can experience what it feels like. It's like nothing I've ever felt before. You get 16 years into the development of this little person, into a big person, a 16-year-old boy, only to be in an acute emergency state, having a health crisis, and to be left to die in an emergency room waiting for healthcare. Healthcare that costs more in Canada than it does in many other areas of the world that deliver much better healthcare. The situation's only getting worse because the system itself is rotten, but nobody wants to tell you the truth of that. Now, why this comes up? Well, this is different, but this is the COVID-19 vaccination policy analysis from the Canadian Defence Department, and we're going to get into why I was looking at this. But during COVID-19, I knew 3 individuals separately, mainly through my work, that developed cancer and died and could not get adequate medical care. 3 people in my circle. Now, it's not a huge circle, but 3 people are no longer here because of the shutdowns that went on in the name of fighting the coronavirus. A coronavirus, which to this day, I mean, I was talking to somebody this morning, and at work, there's a cold going around, and everybody's sure it's COVID. And I'm like, who is still testing for COVID? And this person had no idea how to answer that question, because it's like, why are we still pretending that this is even a thing at this point? COVID-19 was, for most people, a very mild respiratory infection. And that's just the facts. And we shut down critical care, or I should say critical screening, and many areas of healthcare in the name of fighting this thing, and untold hundreds, probably thousands of people didn't get the health care they needed, that they pay enormous amounts of money to get in our socialized system, and are prevented from seeking private alternatives in Canada because it's illegal to. You have to go outside the country, and you couldn't leave the country because of COVID-19. How many thousands died? Totally uncounted. As a result of that, this is another issue that you'll never hear people in power talk about. Now, this is from the Chief of Defense Staff. The right to liberty includes the freedom of all capable adults to refuse medical treatment and to make reasonable medical choices without the threat of criminal prosecution. In his view, the mandatory CAF vaccination requirement did not compel the grievers to get vaccinated without consent or against their will. He stated that the CAF vaccination directives presented some CAF members with a difficult choice: get the vaccine or be subject to service-related consequences that could result in release from the CAF. Well, this could have been a hard choice. It did not amount to coercion. Your right to refuse medical treatment was respected. Isn't it a low bar? And this is the Chief of the Defense Staff. Isn't it a low bar that you're allowed to make reasonable medical choices without threat of criminal prosecution? So you could not be criminally prosecuted, still have your right to make a living taken away from you, have your right to serve taken away from you. And this isn't just the Defense Department. The only reason this comes up, and we're going to get to it, and maybe this is a bit mutilated, but no, it's not that one. It's this one, this article, which I want to go over. Across all industries, the ability to deny you the ability to work, to deny you the ability to live in a residence, to deny you the ability to leave your car. When Manitoba was in its throes, I was preparing to move out here to Saskatchewan. And there was a very real concern going through Manitoba that I would have to obey the strictest of rules. I might be able to get gas, but to actually stop and use a service station or bathrooms and stuff, like, there was some question, because as unvaccinated, you were othered. All of these things satisfy, to a degree, I was actually just thinking of some caveats that you could come up with, satisfy the idea that not participating in the medical experiment was acceptable because it didn't lead to criminal prosecution. Now, you can think about areas where criminal prosecution was initiated against individuals because of their opinions on the vaccine requirements. But I digress. This is an ongoing problem. Canada, court confirms that refusal to obtain COVID-19 vaccination amounts to frustration of contract. This was from 2023. The courts have reinforced in Canada the legality of this mandate. And remember, all of the hundreds and thousands of people who likely died because of the shutdowns and those who were injured by this mandate, all of this was done in the name of combating a highly survivable respiratory infection. There was some excuse in the beginning, given what we've seen coming out of China, to believe that it could be very deadly. I know I did. I took cautions. I didn't necessarily believe it was going to be deadly, but I recognized that it could be. But it became very clear early on that most people were going to be fine and survive this. I knew a guy in his 70s, a paraplegic man, hundreds of pounds overweight, confined to bed, with comorbidities out the wazoo who got COVID and survived. So this just shows that. But this, former soldiers' COVID vaccine lawsuit struck out by federal court. A former Canadian Armed Forces member who claims spiritual discrimination and constructive dismissal over vaccine mandates has had his case struck down. Now, spiritual discrimination. The government was requiring you to put something in your body that it no longer does in the name of fighting something that only the most broken people think is actually still a threat. There are people out there still masking. There are people out there who insist that COVID is real. They can't seem to look around them and see that the world is functioning. But that also opens the avenue that the government has the right to demand, as long as you're free of criminal prosecution, you to take a medical procedure that they deem necessary, putting things in your body. It's the end of bodily autonomy. So long as you're not being criminally charged, you can be denied the right to eat, to housing, to everything else, as long as you're not charged with a crime. That's a pretty low bar. The Federal Court of Canada has struck out a claim brought by a former Canadian Armed Forces member who alleged constructive dismissal and Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms breaches after he refused to comply with COVID-19 vaccination policies, with the judge ruling that the claim disclosed no reasonable cause of action and fell outside the court's jurisdiction. I don't understand how a court, the highest supposed law in the land is the Charter. How can that be out of a court's jurisdiction? Who else are you going to go and talk to? If the courts can't decide on whether or not you have a right to live, not be criminally prosecuted, but a right to actually survive and live, if you choose to not participate in a medical experiment, this nation, handing down his decision on Tuesday, 22nd of July, Justice William Pentney found that Liam Jarboe, who served in the CAF for 8 years until March 2024, failed to plead the material facts required to sustain claims of constructive dismissal and breaches of his charter rights. So he talks about his spiritual beliefs. This is, okay, so here's the clincher for me. The monarchy in Canada is not real, right? It's just ceremonial. In spite of the fact that Parliament's been sent home, the government is still functioning. They're functioning through the power of the Governor General's office, which is the monarch's direct representative, even though it's appointed by the government. The government is negotiating trade deals. They're making vast decisions about our future while Parliament's not in session, because Parliament's not government. The Governor General is, the monarch is. And in all of our legal rulings, the monarch features above all. And the monarch's representative is the Governor General, who works with the Prime Minister and constitutes the government. Justice Pentney allowed the Attorney General's motion holding that CAF members serve at pleasure and cannot invoke civil remedies for constructive dismissal. Quoting Gallant versus the Queen, 1978, the court reiterated the Crown is in no way contractually bound to the members of the armed forces, and that a person who joins the forces enters in a unilateral commitment for which the Queen assumes no obligations. So you join the military to make the ultimate sacrifice for the defense of your nation. But the Queen, which is the government, has made very clear that it is not a two-way street. You bend the knee, and she sends you off to die, and she has no obligation towards you. This is established in Canadian law. Isn't that terrible, tragic, horrible? And these are the things that I don't think Canadians can fully grasp, just how authoritarian and totalitarian our system is. And I couldn't give a good damn what university compiles a list about the freedoms of people and puts Canada near the top, because there's always a new list, and the list is always topped by the most socialist nations. That's not an accident. It's propaganda. When you actually start to understand your relationship with your government, which is not the government you elect, then you start to understand why I am so fundamentally over the system that is Canada. And I am Frank Vaughan. Completely ad-free, sponsor-free, endorsement-free, free to say whatever I want without feeling beholden to anybody except you, the viewer. If you like my work, consider supporting it via the website. I'll see you in the next one.